I'll admit I was wrong about modern Star Trek's riskiest TV show. When Paramount Plus first announced its plans to expand the Star Trek franchise with multiple new series, I rolled my eyes. Nostalgia-driven revivals were everywhere, and it felt like Trek was about to follow the same formula: lean on past glories, recycle familiar storylines, and slap a glossy streaming sheen on the whole thing. I wasn't against Star Trek coming back, far from it. But I feared that quantity would win out over quality. And when one particular project was revealed, I was certain it would be a misfire. That show was Star Trek Lower Decks. At the time, the idea sounded like a joke gone too far. An animated workplace comedy set aboard a Federation starship, focused not on captains and admirals, but on ensigns cleaning up plasma leaks and screwing up holodeck programs? To me, that seemed like the riskiest, most ill-conceived swing of modern Trek. I was convinced it would cheapen the franchise, reduce its legacy to punchlines, and alienate both newcomers and longtime fans. And yet, several seasons later, I'll admit I was wrong. Completely wrong. Why Lower Decks looked like a disaster waiting to happen? To understand my initial skepticism, you have to remember the moment Trek was in. When Lower Decks was announced in 2018, Star Trek Discovery had already divided the fanbase. Some praised its serialized approach and darker tone. Others criticized its departures from canon and inconsistencies. Meanwhile, a new Picard series was on the horizon, promising to resurrect one of Trek's most beloved captains. In that climate, Lower Decks felt like a gamble too far. Trek had always carried itself with a certain dignity, hopeful, philosophical, even when it dipped into camp. Comedy wasn't absent. TNG's Cupid, DS9's Take Me Out to the Holosuite, and Voyager's Doctor episodes proved that, but it was usually an accent, not the main flavor. Making humor the entire premise felt like Paramount was playing fast and loose with one of science fiction's most prestigious brands. I pictured cheap gags, shallow parodies of better Trek episodes, and an endless barrage of Easter eggs meant to distract fans from the lack of substance. What I didn't picture was heart. The big surprise. It's funny because it loves Star Trek. The first thing I realized after actually watching Lower Decks is that the writers didn't mock Trek, they worshipped it. Creator Mike McMahan, who previously worked on Rick and Morty, clearly approached the show as a fan first and foremost. Every joke, no matter how absurd, was built on deep familiarity with the universe. Yes, Lower Decks pokes fun at the tropes we've seen for decades: the over-the-top captains, the endless away missions gone wrong, the technobabble that somehow always saves the day. But it does so with affection. It's the difference between a stranger making fun of your family and a sibling doing it. One stings, the other feels like love. And beneath the humor, the show takes the same core themes as any great Trek series: exploration, morality, and the resilience of friendship. Ensigns Mariner, Boimler, Tendi, and Rutherford may not be commanding the bridge, but their stories reflect the same struggles as Kirk, Sisko, or Janeway, just at a different level. They're trying to prove themselves, navigate Starfleet's ideals, and find meaning in a vast and often ridiculous galaxy. I expected parody. What I got was celebration. A different lens on Starfleet. What makes Lower Decks so special is how it reframes the Trek experience. Traditionally, we followed the senior officers, the best of the best, on ships like the Enterprise or Deep Space Nine. Lower Decks flips the perspective to the junior crew aboard the USS Cerritos, a California-class vessel specializing in second contact. That phrase alone says everything. While Picard gets to make first contact with mysterious civilizations, Captain Freeman's crew shows up later to handle the paperwork, infrastructure, and logistics. It's not glamorous, but it's essential. By focusing on the Lower Decks, the show acknowledges something every fan has thought at least once. What about all the background characters wandering the corridors of starships? What about the people fixing the replicators or cleaning up after a transporter accident? Lower Decks humanizes them. And in doing so, it democratizes Starfleet. Not everyone gets to be Kirk, but everyone contributes. That, I think, is one of the most authentically Trek messages the franchise has delivered in years. Risky? Absolutely. But risk is what Trek has always done best. The more I thought about it, the more I realized my initial resistance said less about the show and more about my own rigid expectations. I had boxed Star Trek into a narrow definition: cerebral, serious, live action, dramatic. But Trek has always been about bold experimentation. The original series broke TV norms with diverse casting and allegorical storytelling. The Next Generation proved lightning could strike twice with a whole new cast. Deep Space Nine dared to tell serialized, morally complex arcs in an era of episodic television. Voyager and Enterprise each tried to push Trek into uncharted territory, even when uneven. By those standards, Lower Decks was simply carrying the torch of risk-taking. Animation, comedy, a focus on side characters. These weren't betrayals of Trek's spirit, they were extensions of it. And now that the show has survived multiple seasons, it's clear the gamble paid off. It's become a fan favorite, even winning over skeptics like me. Lower Decks proves humor belongs in Star Trek. One of the biggest surprises was how naturally comedy fit into the Star Trek mold. Think about it, Trek has always had a sense of play. The trouble with tribbles. Spock's dry wit. Data trying to learn jokes. Holodeck malfunctions that spiral into farce. Even the most serious captains had their comedic moments. Sisko in the baseball episode, Picard exasperated by Q, Janeway rolling her eyes at Tom Paris. Lower Decks simply turned up the volume on something that was already there. And by doing so, it brought fresh energy to the franchise. Where Discovery leaned into intensity and Picard into nostalgia, Lower Decks reminded us that Trek can be fun. And maybe, in an era of constant grim reboots, that was exactly the risk Trek needed to take. The legacy of a risky show. Looking back, I realized my fear came from underestimating Star Trek's elasticity. This is a franchise that has endured for nearly 60 years because it adapts, experiments, and reinvents itself. Sometimes the risks don't pay off, but when they do, they expand the universe in ways no one could have predicted. Lower Decks did that. It opened the door for new fans who might not have been drawn to live-action Trek. It gave longtime fans a chance to laugh at the universe they love while still respecting it. And it proved that even the riskiest premise can succeed if handled with authenticity. Now I find myself not only watching each new season with anticipation, but defending Lower Decks to anyone who dismisses it sight unseen. The show I once dreaded has become one of the brightest stars in modern Trek. Conclusion: owning up to being wrong. Admitting you're wrong isn't easy, especially when it comes to something as passionate as Star Trek. But if the franchise has taught me anything, it's the value of humility, growth, and keeping an open mind. I thought Lower Decks would embarrass Trek. Instead, it reinvigorated it. I thought comedy would cheapen the universe. Instead, it enriched it. The riskiest show in modern Trek turned out to be one of its greatest successes. And if I could send a message back to my skeptical 2018 self, it would be this: trust the risk. That's what Starfleet would do. Because sometimes, the boldest leaps are the ones that remind us why we fell in love.